Hello and welcome to the Moviescramble podcast. Today you find us on a very dreich and dreary day. It's been bloody awful. It really, really has. But anyway, brightening up both mine and everybody who's listening is the ever delightful Mary. Mary, how the hell are you?
I have been called a wee regular ray of sunshine once or twice in my life. I am very well, glad that we are chatting again about all things film. And like you, Caught in a Monsoon appears to have lasted for about 72 hours. So bring back summer, all is forgiven.
Yeah, no, that's long gone. Starting to get dark, starting to get rainy, starting to get cold, thinking we're putting heating on in August. It's Scotland. Well done. So the reason we have convened today is to discuss films, as we normally do. Today we are discussing two very different films based around a singular theme. That theme is of the assassin, the hitman, whatever you want to call it, the contract killer. Later on, we will be having a look at the film The Killer, but just now we are going to start with a film from this year called Hitman.
By the way, my name is Gary Johnson, and I'm a fake hitman. I realize not everyone fantasized about the same hitman. Every sting operation was a performance. This is serious.
I am in service business.
And each arrest was like a standing ovation.
Okay, Daniel Day.
It's a film directed by Richard Linklater. It stars Glenn Powell, who also co-wrote the screenplay for the film with the director Linklater. It's a film about a fake hitman. It's based on an article that appeared in a Texas magazine, I think it was, in the 1980s. And at separate times, both Linklater and Powell had read it, and eventually I think it was Glenn Powell took it to Richard Linklater and says, "What do you think about this?" And Linklater obviously read it years ago and said, yeah, it would make a good film of him. So they worked on this idea together. The basis of the film is that hitmen, as in contract killers for hire by the general public, not your state-sponsored assassins or corporate assassins, if you like, the people who are obviously military and all this sort of stuff. The common and garden hitman for hire who's a friend of a friend of a friend does not exist, basically. There is a myth, obviously, surrounding this, pretty much because as long as there's been cinema, there has been people who would kill for money or for some other reason, and they were obviously termed as assassins. And it's now in the general consciousness that these people actually exist. But this film kind of goes some way to dispel that. Powell plays Gary, who is a philosophy and psychology professor, who obviously doesn't earn enough money from actually teaching. So as a part-time gig, he works as a tech for the local New Orleans Police Department. He's involved in a team who carry out sting operations for people who are looking to hire a hitman. In the course of one of the investigations, the main guy who actually meets with the prospective clients, a guy called Justin, is actually suspended because of, well, you never actually see it, but apparently he was beating up teenagers and it was caught on camera. So rather than call off the meeting, the team asked Gary to go in and actually meet with the prospective client who wants their worse half, as it usually turns out, to be eliminated. Now, obviously, Gary has no experience of doing this, but he turns out to be something of a natural. And with Justin out of the way, he takes on the role and does it very well. Using his skills that he obviously has with psychology and philosophy, he basically tailors his hitman persona to whatever the client needs, with hilarious consequences. Things go a wee bit awry when he meets a prospective client called Madison, who wants to kill her husband because she's in a desperate situation where basically the guy's a prick and he's been a prick for a long time and he's abusive towards her. But Gary, in the guise of, what was his name?
Ron.
Ron. In the guise of Ron, basically talks her out of it. And they obviously form a romantic relationship. And that's basically where, and it's obviously all the entanglements that come from that over the course of 2 hours. So, Mary, what were your initial thoughts on the film? Had you seen it? Had you seen anything about it before it actually came out, considering it was on Netflix? And what did you think?
No, I don't remember seeing any like lead up or advertising to it. I think I saw a couple of tweets on the day being like, "Oh, Glenn Powell's in this new film," so I watched it because I remembered Glenn Powell obviously from Top Gun.
Mm-hmm.
Hadn't seen anything else that he'd been in, but I knew there was a sort of whole debacle over him and the Sydney Sweeney rom-com, which didn't seem up my street, so I thought, give this a go. I think for me, he is definitely the best thing about this film. Like, his performance is very versatile as he adapts to all those different hitman personas, and he's very charming. I will point out that I never had a philosophy teacher who looked like Glenn Powell when I was at uni. there was no men with six packs talking about Descartes when I went to uni. But I think for me, this probably was a wee bit too formulaic. It kind of hit the beats you expected it to hit, but Glenn Powell's performance is what kind of elevates it, I would say.
Yeah, I was kind of in the same situation as you. I hadn't really heard very much about it at all and not really saw anything out, basically because it was a Netflix release. They purchased it after it debuted at the Toronto International Film Festival in 2023 and just decided to put it straight onto their service. I think there was a couple of showings at various film festivals, but that didn't really have a theatrical run or anything like that to sort of publicise it beforehand, so it just went straight on. So I wasn't aware of it. I thought it was a pretty good film. I enjoyed the fact that it took a sort of comedic look at the fact that people want to get other people killed, and it was kind of tongue-in-cheek the whole way through, and I did enjoy that, and I thought it was a pretty well put together film. There, like you say, it was a bit formulaic. You kind of knew what was going to happen at any time, and part of that was reflected in the way that the main character of Gary sort of acted throughout the film, but we shall dive into that a little bit. Now, you mentioned the fact that Glenn Powell was basically all over this film. I think he was pretty much in every scene. I don't think there was very many that he wasn't. So there was Gary the lecturer, who, even though you said, you'd never seen a lecturer, he was very sort of dressed down. It was loose shirts, severe side parting, big glasses, that kind of idea.
I know, but you take the glasses off and he's still stunning.
I know. So as a central performer, do you think he did a good job here?
Oh, he absolutely nails it. I mean, don't get me wrong, he had a very two-dimensional thing to do in Top Gun, right? He's the kind of aggravator character, and he did that really well. And obviously he is a, blonde-haired, blue-eyed Adonis, right? Let's not kid ourselves. He is like the all-American boy. So I was a wee bit skeptical at first when I was like, he's a philosophy lecturer, really? But actually, when you see the way he throws himself into this, so this, the initial scene where he's going into this diner to confront this guy about, he just needs him to say it so he's mic'd up, he's wired, he just needs him to say on the wire, like, that he'll pay, to have somebody bumped off. And they've got the wee voiceover, and it's like, think hitman thoughts. And he's like trying to go up. And then once he gets into it, and he's like talking about, people getting eaten by alligators and fingers getting chopped off and putting dynamite in people's heads and stuff like that, you can see that although this is obviously Gary taking on the role, you can see how much fun Glenn Powell is having with it as well, because as you say, it's super tongue-in-cheek. And there is a lovely montage, which actually I'm not usually a fan of film montages, but it works really well in this case, where we get to see all the different characters that he performs when he goes to meet his potential clients. The black-haired Russian and the sort of Willy Wonka-esque Bob person are my two particular favourites when we get to see that. But it also just shows you how good he is at comedy, because I think probably, and it's not a bad thing, but when you look like that, you probably do get typecast in a certain type of role, i.e. the role he played in Top Gun. And actually this shows that he's capable of doing the sort of dramatic stuff, but actually is somebody who can really have a lot of fun with a character and has very, very good comedic timing as well.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, definitely. I particularly liked that montage scene because it could have been very easy to have that extended over quite a long period, having the various hitmen personas. There was one that was very sort of, it was almost like the American Psycho version of a hitman.
Yes, I
things like
love that one
So,
as well. Yeah.
yeah, so it worked really well, and it kind of backed up the fact that he was like almost rehearsing and working at all the parts and all that, and he would do his homework and everything about it. I thought it was really good the very first time that he had to become the hitman, and he was like, oh, he was like flummoxed and he was a bit flustered and everything. So he was just going to walk in, and they said, "You're wearing denim shorts. You can't go in wearing denim shorts."
I don't know why hitmen wouldn't wear denim shorts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he had to change. And when he did that and he started walking towards the restaurant, he basically, you saw him morphing into this performer because he changed the way he walked. He took his glasses off, put them in his pocket, and he straightened himself up almost as well and made himself sort of bulkier and everything as well, and basically changed his whole persona because he was obviously thinking on his feet about how to do this. And I thought that was really, really good. And obviously the way that he presented himself when he started talking to the guy, he would speak very slowly, very deliberately, and he paused so that the other person could never actually like really keep a conversation going. It was always very stuttered and everything. And I thought that was really well done because it's obviously a technique that he knew how to use because he's a teacher. So he knows how to handle people on a certain level anyway. So he was using that sort of experience in order to get by on the first one, which I thought it worked really well. And then, like I say, he went through all this sort of trial and experimentation with beards and all this sort of stuff. So yeah, that was cracking. These German sort of Russian type of guy with the leather coat on and everything was just fantastic. And you could tell they were having an awful lot of fun doing it. I was very impressed because it kind of shows that he's got range and he's not taking himself too seriously, considering that at the moment he is like probably he's been touted as being sort of next big Hollywood star based on the fact, I mean, he said what, 3 films this year? Because he said he said the Sydney Sweeney one, and he said Twisters as well.
Twisters, yeah. And he was obviously in the biggest film of the previous year as well. So it's been a very sort of meteoric, having never heard of him in my puff. I feel like he's, he has been, as you say, touted as the next big star, as it were.
Yeah, he's one of these guys that it looks as if he's come from nowhere, but he's been around for an awful long time. He's been in all sorts of things in like sort of smaller parts, and he's worked with Richard Linklater before with Everybody Wants Some, the sort of the college baseball drama. He was like one of the team in that as well. So he is one of these recognizable faces that when you'll be sitting watching something and he'll suddenly pop up on the screen and you go, I know him, he's famous now. But yes, I think Top Gun was a big step for him that showed that he could sort of command presence. And I think Tom Cruise and him got on very well because Tom Cruise was pictured with him at a screening of Twisters, I think it was. So he was helping to promote that in his own sweet way as well. So yeah, I thought it was pretty decent. Now, the film itself was, as I say, based on a newspaper article. And it says that at the start that it's mostly true. do you really believe that based on what you see on the screen? And without giving anything away, there's a wee disclaimer at the end with part of it, which basically covers the whole of the third act. Do you think it worked better because of the fact that they just had a wee soupçon of truth in there?
I mean, it did sort of pique my interest in the sense that I did think that like Hitmen for Hire did exist because of films that I've seen. So it's quite interesting that it really sort of plays on that. And I like the fact that because they obviously head it off by saying it's kind of sort of true, that there is this artistic license to then go a bit wild with it. But it's an unusual kind of Hitman film when they're telling you it's a true story, because I kind of thought I was going to get a serious drama and then didn't anticipate how like comedic it was going to be and how light. So I think that when you see things that are a true story, you often think you're going to get something that's really like gritty and it's going to, you know, make you very upset and all the rest of it. Whereas because this was really playful, even the language that it uses when it's telling you it's a true story, that kind of sets the tone for the rest of the film. And as you say, there's a little sort of note at the end to be like, well, kind of, we were making some of it up. So I think it's an interesting approach to take, that they are sort of framing it in the, you know, based on a true story, because that usually is some sort of big sort of, you know, gravitas kind of approach to films, whereas this is very sort of tongue-in-cheek.
Yeah, I did like it, and I think it had enough, just the basis of it. I mean, it's basically the one-line pitch. Hitmen don't exist. Discuss.
Yeah.
So that's pretty much their starting point, and they took it from there. And basically all the main plot points in the film were all made up. So
they were very liberal with the true bits that they used.
Yes, yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I did like the fact that they used a voiceover for part of it as well. That can be done well or badly, usually because it's used for exposition more than anything else. Whereas here, I thought it was okay. Did it bother you at all?
No, because I thought it was, as I say, I thought it was quite funny. Like that opening scene in particular, where he's, as you say, psyching himself up to go into this diner, and the wee voiceover, as I say, it's like think Hitman thoughts. That to me was really funny because it is character insight, because he's obviously sitting there shitting himself. But it was never used in a way that sort of put me off. It was always a way that I was kind of like, oh, that's funny, or that's relatable, or whatever. And it sort of fleshed him out as a character. Because again, if you didn't have that element of it, he also might feel a bit two-dimensional, despite the fact that he's, you know, doing the dress up and all that. Whereas that gave a wee bit of insight into him, because when we first meet him, you know, he's this sort of, he's into birds, obviously, and not the Glasgow slang birds, I mean actual birds. And, you know, he's sitting in the back of the car with his colleagues and he's telling them about like the rare birds that he's spotted, and the two of them were like, what the fuck? Because they thought he was cool because he'd went in and been all hard, and now he's just like this kind of dweeby guy. But I really like the fact that the voiceover gave us that wee bit of insight into obviously quite an insecure person, obviously not really fully confident in himself. And actually, as he becomes Ron, he sort of changes as a person, and we get that little bit of insight into that as well. So I did like it. I thought it worked well.
Yeah, I enjoyed certain elements of it like that, because it just added to the film rather than take. Sometimes it can take you out of the film. You're just saying, I'm just been told stuff here. You know, we're always going on about shows it on the screen. Don't tell us all the time. You know, we as an audience, we should be able to work these things out. So yes, I definitely thought it was okay. What did you think of the pacing of the film? Do you think that was decent? I mean, you're talking about the best part of 2 hours here. Was it all right? Did it flag in bits, or?
I think it does flag for me. I think once you get over the initial, like, oh, this is hilarious, he's dressing up as 25 different people, it did kind of drop a wee bit for me, because there was a wee bit of lather, rinse, repeat when he was going to Madison's house and they were obviously hooking up. And I don't know, I felt like they were trying to shoehorn sex scenes in that maybe didn't need to be there necessarily. So it did sort of lose my interest there. And as I said at the start, I felt like this had certain beats to hit. And so for me, the last 20 minutes or so felt very rushed, because they'd spent so much time on this relationship building stuff, which I didn't really buy into that much. So it did feel like they rushed the end for the sake of stuff that wasn't that great in the middle, the sort of romantic kind of element to the story.
Yeah, I think you're right. The chemistry between them, though, was quite good. I did like that. I thought as an on-screen pairing, they worked pretty well because of the way that it was obviously written and the fact that they were both very good actors. We're talking about Adria Arjoran or something. I can't remember her name. Yeah, I think that's it. So I thought both of them, being particularly good actors, pulled that off. But yes, there was a bit of, time for another sexy moment kind of idea where you may or may not have needed that. And yes, you're right. The third sort of act of it, the last 20 minutes, was a little rushed. What I didn't particularly like was the fact that you got a sense early on that the character of Gary was pretty much unflappable. He could adapt to any situation and he would think in his feet. Now, by doing that, that takes away any element of danger that's going to be brought up in the film. And there were elements of danger. The whole point of the ending of it had to do with the fact that he was involved with a woman who he basically talked out of hiring a hitman to kill her husband. And there was never a point where you thought, yeah, he's going to get caught out and things like that. And I thought that was pretty much one of the main sort of gripes. Now, it's not to say I didn't enjoy the film. I did. I thought it was a good film, but there was no sense of tension in those sort of scenes at all. I just didn't buy it, if you like.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. As you say, I think this sort of unshakable person that he sort of sets himself up to be, he's somebody who stands in front of a class full of students who are quite clearly taking the piss out of him all the time. So he's obviously not somebody who cares about what other people think about him and stuff like that. He's got confidence to get up and speak. And so there was never this sense that, his colleagues were going to suddenly turn on him or that he wouldn't be believed, because he was a very credible person. So whatever he presented as fact was usually taken as fact. So it did sort of take that danger. Yes, he's obviously pretending to be a hitman, and yes, the woman that he's hooking up with has tried to hide him, but there was never a sense that, we're going to see like a big bloody shootout here, or he's going to get arrested and carted off because it's all going to go to shit. It all just, and that's what I mean by kind of formulaic, it all just sort of meandered towards the end, which kind of took away my enjoyment from it a wee bit.
Yeah, you mentioned there the fact that he's a university professor, or college professor, I should say. Now, those scenes were used as the lead-in to certain elements. It was almost as if he was describing what Gary or Ron was going to be doing next. And do you think that was a good sort of framing device for the film, or do you think it was a little heavy-handed?
No, I actually quite like that. I like the scene where he's got the students out on the grass or whatever. He's saying, you've got a tyrannous leader. What would you do? If this is back in the caveman days, imagine what you would do, the threat of your entire population. So I quite like that, because, as I say, it's obviously a leading question for Ron, his persona, but not for Gary. And actually, as his confidence grows as Ron, we see his confidence grow as Gary, because at one point, even one of the students says, "When did our professor get hot?" And I'm like, really? You can't even see the six-pack through the polo neck? So I quite like the fact that we did get to see that side of him, because, again, for Glenn Powell, it's shown a different sort of persona, and he's getting to really sort of flex his acting chops, as it were, because this is him as the very studious and serious professor. That's him as the sexy hitman and all the rest. Although, is Ron a sexy name? That's probably one of my gripes with this film as well. Was Ron a sexy name in the 80s?
If you were Ronald Reagan, maybe, yeah. You've got to ask, has Ron ever been a sexy name? And I'm probably alienating one of our only listeners here. But yeah,
I thought those sections worked, because ultimately, yes, he is this alter ego as the hitman, but I did want to know about Gary as well, what had sort of driven him to, and we obviously get a wee bit of backstory with his ex-wife and things like that, because I did want to understand what had driven him to become this sort of kind of recluse, kind of oddball, and why he'd chosen to go down the route of taking on this extra job with the police. And I believe those scenes sort of flesh that side of him out.
Yeah, it was like he was almost looking for something to keep him occupied more than anything else, because apart from that, he would be in his house with his cats and
feeding
marking
birds.
papers and setting up bird feeders and all sorts of stuff like that. And just a part of it, he said, he had a perfectly nice life, but I think that was the problem with part of it. He got into this routine, and it was, like I say, almost like a hermit-like existence, because he'd obviously been married before and it hadn't worked out. But there was a mutual understanding between him and his ex-wife, because that was fleshed out in a scene that they had between each other, where they obviously still got on very well together and they could speak to each other quite civilly. And it showed that, Gary's a nice guy, but he's obviously lost a bit of his confidence because of the fact that he was in a relationship that failed, and that's not something that's natural to most people. They don't expect to fail at anything. And for somebody who is academically adept like him, he obviously knows an awful lot about psychology, sociology, all this sort of stuff. So it would almost be that he would expect to understand what's going on, and it takes sort of placing himself outside of that into another character or another couple of characters to actually figure out what he really is himself. So yeah, I did think that was particularly well done. Now, we've talked about the main actor, the main female actor, and obviously one of the supporting actors. There was obviously another couple in there as well, the team from the police and everything. So do you think they did the job? I mean, they weren't on screen for an awful lot of the time, but what did you think of them?
Weren't. But so it's Retta and Sanjay Rao, I think, are the
Yeah.
sort of police colleagues that he has, Claudette and Phil. And I loved Retta. I'm sure she's in Parks and Rec.
She is, yeah.
Treat yourself. So that was kind of in my head. But I really like their chemistry as co-workers was excellent, because when Gary's rattling on about birds in the car, the two of them are sort of making eyes at each other and being like, what the fuck? And later on, when he overhears them talking about Ron, and Claudette's like, she was like, I would do unspeakable things to Ron. I wouldn't even share a straw with Gary, which really made me laugh. But I thought their chemistry was really nice. And don't get me wrong, they are a wee bit two-dimensional with sort of like supporting characters that are like buddy cops, as it were. But again, it sort of played into this thing that this was not a film that was not taking itself very seriously. And actually, as two co-workers, I thought their chemistry was excellent. And obviously, they are kind of find themselves falling for Gary's new persona as well, which was really entertaining to watch them getting wrapped up in, him being sort of this sexy hitman.
Yeah, it was a slight diversion at times, obviously, it was welcome, obviously, because it introduces like another wee element to it as well, like you say. I thought it was fine. I thought it was okay. They could have probably had a wee bit more screen time and it would still been quite as enjoyable, but it was all right. I'm not putting them down in any way, because there wasn't very much to work with there, unfortunately.
No, and that's what I mean. So they are kind of these sort of like relatively two-dimensional characters. I think they did well with the screen time that they had, but they weren't groundbreaking in terms of, we have definitely seen those characters before. I just thought those two were really funny.
Yeah. So, like I mentioned at the start, this film was bought by Netflix. I think it's one of the first times that Richard Linklater has worked with a streamer. Whereas before, obviously, a lot of his films have actually gone on to streaming, but they've got cinema releases before. And Linklater himself is one of these directors who changes things up. He does different styles of films and things like that, so it's not always quite the same. Do you think Netflix is having a wee kick at themselves just now in that they didn't release this theatrically? Do you think it would have been a hit?
Do you know, I was thinking this as I was rewatching it. This would have, no pun intended, done a killing at the cinema, especially riding on this wave of everyone loves Glenn Powell sort of thing, because even the Sydney Sweeney film, which from what I've heard is not very good, the publicity around it was great. It was marketed really well. People really bought into him. Twister, I don't know if it's good, bad, or indifferent. But again, he's putting in the shift. He's doing the publicity tour. It seems to be people are they like him. And actually, a sort of comedy thriller esque type thing with him as a hitman, I think people would have loved. And actually, now that you've said that it just went, because I thought it had a cinematic release in the States, but not here, but it did just go straight to Netflix. I actually think that's a big mistake.
Yep. I think there was a bit of money to be made there, like I say, just based on the fact that he is very much in the public eye at the moment. And it's the kind of film that will draw quite a wide audience to it.
Well, it's a date movie. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, so they probably have missed a bit of a trick and probably quite a lot of money on that. But I know that's Netflix's policy, but they have been known to have sort of cinema runs for films. It's usually ones that they're looking to promote.
Oscar.
Yeah, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I don't think they would do that with a romantic comedy drama.
No, and this obviously isn't Oscar bait. Let's obviously not kid ourselves. But
No.
I do think this would have made a lot of money. It's got pretty much every element, as you say, to attract. It's got the thriller elements, the hitman elements, the comedy elements, the romantic elements. I actually think that's been a huge mistake. Now, obviously, Netflix quite famously don't really release their numbers. It was number one on Netflix for a while. Every time you logged in, it was there. And it was sitting at number one. I do think that's been a big error. And as you said, they've done like a cinematic one of like a week for example, All Quiet on the Western Front, because they were obviously going to tout that for awards season.
Yep.
And whilst this is, not going to win an Oscar, it does seem like a big error to have not tried to make some money off this.
Yep. Yeah, I agree with that. I think it's a bit of a missed opportunity. And I'm sure that Netflix executives are probably looking at these sort of things and saying, we would have still made the money on this, would have still got the eyes on it if it was on the service, because it's a film that, in my opinion, has rewatchability, just because it's not so much for the actual story itself, but for the it's an easy watch.
Yeah.
Let's face it. It's something that you can watch again quite easily. I mean, I've seen it twice now, so and it was just as good the second time. So if I'd seen it at the cinema, yes, I'd have watched it when it came on Netflix anyway. So yes.
Yeah, just even like a 2-3 week run. Now, obviously, you would time that so that it wasn't coming up against anything particularly massive at the box office. But I do think even a wee 2 or 3 week run of this, because it is the type of film that you would go into work and, did you go? I went to cinema. Yeah, me and my husband went to see Hitman. Is it good? Yeah. And that would, somebody would then go and see it. It's that type of film where you'd be chatting about what you did at your weekend. You would mention this and somebody else would go and see it. I have no doubt about that.
Cool. So on the back of everything that we've discussed, would you recommend this movie?
I am torn on this because I would absolutely recommend it for Glenn Powell's performance, which is genuinely like brilliant in this. Is it something you've not seen before? No. Does it have some pacing issues? Yes. I feel like I'll be nice and say yes, I would recommend it because he is very, very good in it. So if you like the sort of tongue-in-cheek kind of style approach to films, I feel like this is definitely your bag. But just be aware that 2 hours is probably a bit too long for this.
Yeah, I would recommend it. I think it's a fairly gentle, straightforward film. It hits certain beats at certain times. You're not going to be surprised by it, but you're not going to be bored by it either. So I think, yes, I would recommend it. So, and if it's got my seal of approval, I'm sure it'll do very, very well.
Well, that's it. Netflix are making a note right now that you said that.
Yep, certainly hope so. If they can reduce my payments in some way, that would be lovely. So, having talked about a film that dispels the myth of hitmen, we are going to move on to our second feature for the evening, which again comes from the Netflix stable, but this is a very different beast indeed. The Killer from 2023 is a David Fincher film. It's part of David Fincher's deal with Netflix that he signed a couple of years ago, initially to do Manhunter, I think it was, but he's since moved
Mindhunter,
into Mindhunter. Sorry, yes,
more friggin' episodes because it ended in a fucking cliffhanger and there's no more of it.
I don't think there's going to be any more of it anytime soon. So anyway, he moved into film production with Netflix as well. He did the film Mank, which was particularly good. I really enjoyed that movie from a couple of years ago. And now he has done the film The Killer, which is based on a French graphic novel which ran from 1998 through to about 2010, 2011, and then had a sequel in 2020 through to, I think, present day. There's a series of books about the titular killer. Now, the film stars Michael Fassbender, Tilda Swinton, and a bunch of other folk that are all on the screen for about 6 minutes. So you don't really have very much to worry about in terms of who's actually in this movie. The story itself is based around a killer, a hitman, if you were, who obviously in this universe do exist, and they are for hire for jobs.
Very much so.
He is very much a professional. He is on a job in Paris where he is hanging about for about 3 days waiting to carry out the hit. When it happens, there is an error and he doesn't get the target and basically runs away, which he's trained to do, which he obviously does very well. He goes back to his home base in the Dominican Republic to find that his house has been breached. His girlfriend is badly beaten and in the hospital. And he realizes that they were actually there to get him and basically tie up loose ends from a botched job. So what he does is he goes on a revenge mission to basically have a nice wee quiet word with his handler and then anybody else who was involved in the contract in the first place. And basically he works his way through that. Now, that's a fairly light description of the film, I think. Mary, again, did you know anything about this film beforehand? I take it you had not read the graphic novel in its original French or anything?
No. Didn't quite
think?
have the time for that. Again, totally fell onto Netflix and I knew nothing about it, but it's a David Fincher film. Michael Fassbender's usually very good in things. And so I thought, okay, perfect. And it was definitely not the film I think most people are going to think it is. And actually, I've heard a lot of people saying that they switched off after the first 20 to 30 minutes because quite literally nothing happens. But that's kind of the point of it. So I think if you go into it expecting a sort of, yes, there is violence and it's dramatic and it's intense, but it's probably not the contract killer film. It's not like a Jason Statham film, put it that way. It's much more cerebral and takes its time and then kind of shocks you when you're least expecting it. I mean, ultimately it's a sort of revenge thriller, but it's not I just think it's not what people might expect.
Yeah, I know what you mean. It wasn't what I was expecting because I had never read any of the original source material either, so I didn't really know what to expect going into it. The first 20, 30 minutes does kind of lull you into a false sense of security because there are parallels with Hitman in that there is a voiceover and it's basically explaining his methodology, how he actually goes about his business, and it's all about the waiting. There's no quick sort of payoff with these type of things. It's all done very methodically. It's all thought out. There are certain things that have to be done. They have to be done in a certain order. There are precautions that need to be taken just in case that you may never come to anything. And you see that after the first botched hit because the way that he extracts himself from that situation has been thought out to sort of like the nth degree, the way that he gets rid of gun parts. And
it's a phenomenal kind of tracking shot almost where, and I think the thing is, what I love about that opening sequence is, one, it really reminds me of Rear Window because you are just looking in that apartment block and seeing all the lights go on and people going to the restaurant and stuff like that. But it underlines a sort of rigorousness in this character. And then it all goes to shit. So you're not expecting this character to fail because you're like, this guy is a consummate professional. He even knows when to sleep, and he's doing his yoga and he's keeping an eye on things. So you're not anticipating the failure. And then, as I say, it's not quite a tracking shot, but as he flees that building and the way he discards the jacket that he's wearing, the gun, the bike helmet, it's done so nonchalantly that, again, the whole idea of this character is, right, that you would walk past him in the street and you would not think, oh my God, that guy's a contract killer. And the way he even discards his equipment is done in such a way that would not draw attention to himself at all. You would not look at him twice and go, did that guy just throw away a gun? It's really, really brilliant. And I like that sort of character building where we have this expectation of who he is within the first, as I say, 20 to 30 minutes, and then it's completely shattered. But actually, the way he deals with that is in the way that he's set up to be as a character. It is perfect. It is methodical. It's, he's got his plan of attack should this go wrong. It's just that we're obviously not expecting it to go wrong because he's set up as such a perfectionist.
Yes, yeah. And when it does go wrong, that's really where the whole action part of it, the whole revenge part of it kicks in. Again, I wasn't expecting that to actually happen. I actually don't know what I expected, but I didn't expect it to turn out to be the type of story of revenge that it was. I did like the fact that everything he did, he followed through on. He knew what he was doing. There was always a plan. There was always contingencies. He always had something that he was going to be able to do, a source he was going to be able to use. Like, he had like lockups and things like that, and all it had in it. Like, he mentions that, it says, if after I'm dead, and they have an episode of Storage Wars where they open up the they take the lock off and open it up. What are they going to think when they open this, and all the things like guns and grenades and passports and stuff like that, which was quite a nice wee touch. I thought it's a very cold film in that respect because there is not very much in terms of lightness, I would say, because of the methodical nature of it. What did you think his performance? Do you think it was suitable for the film because it was very sort of downplaying the whole
I mean
thing,
he is, first of all, to start off with, he's dressed in like constantly just like beige or grey, right? And even the colour, like the tone of the film is very washed out. So we either get like sort of blues or greys or yellows, kind of depending on where he is. But his performance is incredible. I mean, we don't actually see him speak in that opening sequence. It's all done through voiceover. And when he does speak, there's no emotion there. He's simply carrying out tasks and talking to people in a way that's letting them know that he's carrying out a task, which is obviously kind of part of his nature. You don't become a contract killer because you're super sympathetic to somebody begging for their life. But his whole persona is he's just kind of imbued with nothing. And I don't know how to explain it other than that. Like, there's nothing remarkable about him. He doesn't raise his voice. He's not, going in for the dramatics. There's just this very calm, resolute, obviously obsessive levels of detail, but there's nothing about him that is sort of riddled with like these kind of intense emotions. He's very scary and he has great presence, but not because he's raised his voice or even raising his fists half the time. It's just because there's this nothing there, which I think is quite terrifying.
Yeah, there's a certain stillness to the character because he doesn't expend energy unless he absolutely has to. And when he does, he can do it because it's almost like muscle memory. It kicks in and he goes and does what he needs to. But the whole initial sequence, you get a real flavour for what he is like as a person. He is very methodical. He works in terms of, this is the job I've got to do and I know what I need to do in order to carry it out. Like when he's setting up for the hit, he doesn't just set up and shoot. He waits until his heart rate comes down because then he's totally calm, and that aids with the aiming and the actual taking of the shots. That's obviously like behaviour that's been taught to him and everything. So he's using all the lessons he's been given. I did like the fact that he wore beige and wore like bucket hats and things like that. All that kind. I mean, he just looked like an advert for Uniqlo or something like that. So it was. it was very well done.
We'll be thrilled at that tie-in.
But yeah, it's the kind of thing that you would expect, the kind of thing that we've as an audience have been trained to think of as a hitman. This character who can blend into the background but is very good at his job, not somebody who puts on beards and has a scar on his face and has a fake Russian accent and things like that. It's just not what we're expecting. So in that respect, yes, it did work very well, and I thought he was excellent in it. He was stick thin as well.
Yeah, he was very sinewy. There's a couple of sort of shots where he's maybe having a shower or washing himself, and you can see it's all muscle because every time he moves, you can actually see every part of his body move. But now that you've just said that, to tie this into another podcast that we've done, it did remind me of Argyle, what you've just said. Hitmen don't stand out. They're not the classically good-looking, you know, the guy you walk past on the train or the street or whatever, and you don't look twice at. What a weird tie-in.
I know. Maybe there's some sort of crossover to be had there, you know.
There must be.
I'm sure there probably is at some point. I don't think it will be too far away. If obviously film executives like to listen to our podcast, so I'm sure.
And hang on our every word.
Yeah. So Fassbender was in, I think, every scene in this film sort of mirroring Glenn Powell in Hitman as well. Yeah. Do you think that affected the way that the film was actually reacted to? Like you say, some people switched off after 20 minutes or so. Now, by having this one character just sort of dominating the film, and I mentioned it as well, obviously, the introduction to this, there are not that many sort of named actors in this, and the only other big name in this is Tilda Swinton, and she is on screen for, 10 minutes?
If you're lucky,
you know. So I know he's a star, and I know he's a very good actor, but do you think he carries the film?
Oh, absolutely. Like, I have genuinely no issue with this film, and I know that even our dearly beloved Siri has said that this film just does nothing for him.
Yeah.
But it's his unraveling, as it were, and it's his undoing that makes this so compelling. And actually, I have no issue with sitting watching Michael Fassbender do nothing for 20 minutes as an opening for a film, because it's very, very character building in terms of understanding who he is. And actually, what I love about this film is that his voiceover is, you know, relaying these particular rules or sort of standards that he has, and then what we see on screen does not, you know, it contradicts that. So I think he absolutely does carry this film, because it's not, do you know what, when we were saying about Hitman doing well in cinemas, this film would not do well in cinemas, because one, it would require people to be quiet, and two, it's just not that type of big blockbuster. But Fassbender's career to date, yes, he has obviously been in big films, but he often makes quite interesting choices like this. And this feels like a role that's very much built for him. You know, it's an interesting character. There is a mission. He has to get from A to B. You know, the plot is very, very clear, but it's not your typical, it's not a John Wick or something. As I say, it's not a Jason Statham film. There's a lot more to it. And that kind of low-key type of approach is very, very much what he does well. And I think he absolutely does carry this film. It's also difficult when you are a lead character, but you're not actually speaking for a lot of the time. So a lot of what we get is this inner monologue by way of voiceover. So the fact that he doesn't actually say that much either, and yet is still a very commanding presence, I think that's quite a feat.
Yep. It was interesting to note that Michael Fassbender took time off from acting. He did the Snowman film, which is better left uncritiqued. And then the film came out in 2019, the X-Men Dark Phoenix film, where...
Oh, I forgot all about that.
I know, a lot of people did, yeah. So he reprised his role of Magneto in that. I think his performance was actually filmed maybe a year or 2 years before that, because that was a very sort of troubled production. So in effect, he did not act at all between 2018 and 2023. He took himself away and got involved in motor racing as well. He was involved in the motor racing team, So he basically took a break from acting. Now, a lot of people didn't notice it, basically because 2020 through 2023 was nothing shite time. And there was so There was more important things we were thinking about rather than, oh,
Yeah.
where's Michael? We've not seen him for a wee while.
Yeah, we were all trying not to die of that plague they promised us. We
Mhm.
didn't give a thought for Michael Fassbender's career.
So I obviously come back with that, and then Next Goal Wins as well, which they came out roughly about the same time. So he was away for a good period of time, and I think it didn't do him any harm in terms of what he brought to the screen, because the ask for him in this film was quite big. He had to be in pretty much every scene, and he basically had to dominate every scene. And also he had to sort of play down a lot of it as well. There's a few killings in this film, we shall say,
One or two.
without going into any sort of spoilery territory. But there is only one action scene in this film,
Yeah.
which
Yeah, there's
is
only one
quite
big-
surprising. Yeah.
Yeah, set piece, because although, as I said, the premise is a contract killer, yeah, the rest of the violence that takes place is sort of one-on-one, so it has this kind of intimacy to it, which has its own intensity, right? Because you're killing someone who's not that far away from you, like literally sitting across a table from you or whatever. But there's only one big sort of massive set piece, and even that is mostly it's nighttime, so it's in the shadows of somebody's house. You're not even really fully seeing that, other than like a trail of blood across a tiled floor, or you're hearing it. There's a horrible moment in that where they're obviously rolling around on broken glass, and the sound is, it'll go right through you, but you don't actually see a lot of it.
Yes. Like you say, the sound design does an awful lot of work, because there's a lot of throwing people through doors and hitting it off of TVs and all sorts of stuff like that. So yes, and a lot of grunting, a lot of sort of heavy male grunting as well.
Yeah.
It was the only part of the film where you could see that the character of the killer was slightly in trouble, because he's very able in terms of sort of one-to-one physical combat, but the guy he was fighting was a brute. He was actually called the Brute. Yeah. So, and he was also very capable, because obviously he was an assassin, a hitman, whatever you want to call them as well. So it didn't go, he'd obviously planned it out, but it didn't go exactly to plan. And you could see the panic in his face at certain stages as well. And the way that he sort of extricated himself from the situation had more than a wee bit to do with luck, more than anything else. It could have gone any way. So, but that was the only time you actually saw that he was quite fallible, if you like.
Oh yeah, definitely. And I think that scene in particular does stand out, because you're just kind of going, hang on a minute, there isn't a list of, if you do this, that and the next thing, this will get you out of this. Sometimes it's just a case of, you're physically mismatched. But I thought that was done really well, because as you say, up until that point, he's checked in at loads of airports under loads of different names, and he's very good at that one-to-one interaction where he's looking someone directly in the eye and he's letting them do the panic talking while he just stares and observes. This time he's just relying on his fists, and actually, despite the fact that we've said he's very sinewy in this, so there's obviously a lot of muscle there, he is getting tossed around like a sack of spuds by the Brute. And I think that's what Hitman, as we said, is missing. There's no sense of danger or fallibility there, whereas during this big set piece, you're kind of thinking he's getting his arse handed to him, and that he's probably not going to make out of it.
Yeah, there is an element of that. You mentioned there about the many airports. Did you notice what he used in terms of names for the passports?
Oh no, what have I missed?
It was all 70s television characters he used from sitcoms. There was like Felix Unger and things like that. So it was like, there was all these sort of things, and Lou Grant and stuff like that from Mary Tyler Moore's show. So there was a few of them, and it brought a sort of wry smell, and it kind of showed that he does actually have almost like a very dry sense of humor, because he was using these character names that a lot of people wouldn't know now, because they won't.
I obviously missed them. Yeah,
you say Felix Unger, and people are like, I've got no idea who that is. They don't realise he was like obviously in The Odd Couple and things like that, which was obviously a film and a very successful TV show. But there was a few of them like that. I thought that was but I think there might even have been a Richie Cunningham in there as well from Happy Days. So,
right, okay.
So that was.
Do you know what though? That is like, and as I say, it's obviously flown over my head as well, embarrassingly. But for so many people, that'll have been like the lightest of light touches in this film that is so dark.
Yep. So obviously said the film is very dark and it's quite tense. Do you think that tension worked its way through the film? Do you think there was ups and downs, or do you think it was all just kind of on a level?
I think it does, because I think that, as I say, although the first 20 minutes or so of this very slow burn, once that mistake happens, there's a beautiful moment where he's been talking very calmly and he misses the shot, and then he goes, fuck, and his voice does crack slightly, and you two are sitting there going, oh God, what happens next? You've told us this isn't going to fail. And I do think that tension of, he comes home, there's people after him now because he's made this mistake. But once you get in your head that he's got this list of people that he's going to work his way through, given how methodical he has presented himself as, this is going to happen. And actually, I do think that helps the tension, because there's a couple of very unexpected and perhaps unwarranted character deaths as well as he's picking people off. But given that that he wants to get rid of the trail of evidence that he's made this mistake, I think the tension is there, because it's a case of, okay, well, how is he going to do this? And who are these people? And for a lot of the time, as I said, he's completely silent and there are people literally begging for their lives. That is horrible to watch. So it does sustain this really sort of ugly feeling the whole way through. It is tense, but it's also just like, Jesus, do you ever take a day off from being this terrible, contract killer? Can you just let someone live? So yeah, I think the tension is definitely there.
Yeah, definitely. I thought it was very well paced indeed. The previous scene that we've mentioned where there was the big fight was a total change of pace, but then it just went back down to that same sort of level, and it kind of mirrored the way that the character actually was, as in quiet, methodical. It was all trying to keep things all on one level. Now, you mentioned the chase sequence there, not a chase sequence, the escape sequence. I saw a behind-the-scenes VFX video of that, and pretty much all of it was generated by computer. It's fascinating to see how that was all constructed. There was no motorcycle.
Shut up.
No motorcycle.
Oh my God.
It was computer generated, and obviously there's close-ups actually on the motorcycle when he's driving it, and you see him and you see the reflection of like streetlights and all that. And there was only his face, and it was superimposed onto that complete image, that complete frame of a motorcycle on the street.
Blown my mind.
That's
like
really,
honestly, that's
crazy.
one of my favorite sequences in the film, just because it's so smooth how he gets rid of everything. That's insane. That is absolutely insane.
Obviously, there was some parts that were filmed real, but there was a whole bunch of it that just it was almost like an impossible camera angle and things like that. And they did that. They basically generated it, and because there was so little of him actually shown, because he was
wearing a helmet,
wearing motorcycle gear, and he was wearing a helmet, then they could get away with that quite easily because they can generate this stuff and it looks so real. It was amazing. And I think there was an awful lot of that in this film that you don't think is actually generated by computers, but it actually was. But that was the main sort of standout. And like you said, I was like kind of like, no, you're joking, because it just looked so perfect, so sort of spot on.
Unbelievable. Like usually when you see special effects in these films, you're kind of like, oh, I can tell this has been done on green screen. I'm actually shocked, because it's one of my favourite scenes in the whole film.
If you can delve into these things, you can go down a real rabbit hole starting watching these sort of behind the scenes videos, and it will shock you the amount of stuff that is not actually on a screen when you've got people like coming off of a helicopter and things like that, and none of it is real. I'd watched one, I think it was Pacific Rim, and it was Idris Elba coming out of a helicopter and coming along, and they were on a ship or something like that, and nothing. It was basically done in a car park. And the helicopter wasn't real, the ship wasn't real, The weather wasn't real. Nothing. It was really bizarre, and yet it
I
looked
think because
really
in a
good.
film like this, it's not like a big blockbustery type film. It feels,
Yep.
I don't want to say it feels low budget because I feel like that's a derogatory statement. That's not what I mean. But
Yep.
it's not like a big, Marvel movie or something like that. So the fact that it's computer generated is just insane to me because it feels so tight and so flawless that I just can't imagine it not being real.
Yeah, it's just used so much now because it's cheaper to do it that way than it is to, block off streets in Paris for days or weeks at a time.
And I suppose he needs like insurance to ride a motorbike.
Yep.
But then, ironically, because he has, is he done Le Mans? So you assume he's like quite adept at these kind of maybe stunt type driving experience. But I suppose it probably is quite, unless you're Tom Cruise, I suppose it is quite expensive to insure people to do things like this as well. So I suppose that's a factor. But I'm honestly shocked.
There you go.
You've blown my tiny mind.
It's out there. It's on the internet. So that's the way it is. So having briefly talked about that, we obviously go back and talk about the sort of the style and the direction of the film. Now, you mentioned the sort of washed out colour palette and everything, and the fact that there was a big fight sequence and it was mostly at night, you didn't see anything. Do you think that worked, or do you think it could have been done slightly differently, or what did you think?
No, I feel like this is a kind of grimy sort of film. As I say, there's a kind of ugly feeling that permeates it. So actually, I don't want to see pretty Paris, all sort of lit up and looking sparkly. I want to see the sort of dirty wee side streets and the terrible little 24-hour toilets that he goes into to, wash himself and stuff like that. I think it does definitely work because it's sort of, by using that color palette, it sort of further disappears him into it as well because he's not popping out in a bright suit or whatever. He's just part of this kind of, as I say, kind of ugly, sort of grey, gritty, grimy, kind of just washed out looking. No matter where he is, and he flies all over. I mean, he's like America, South America, Europe, all that sort of thing. So he's back and forth. And yet everywhere he goes seems to be bathed in this horrible light. And I think it definitely does work. And there's also like, he's often shot like from below or in really tight close up. So there's this kind of power dynamic established really quickly with him as well. And I do think it works really, really well. And usually I'm the first person to point out, like, there is that meme where it's like Poland's always grey and South America's always yellow on Netflix. And it is a wee tiny bit of that. But I think, it's not a light and frothy film, and therefore it shouldn't be little pops of colour here and there. You want it to feel dark and depressing because he is somebody who works in the shadows.
Yeah, even the stuff in the Dominican Republic was kind of muted as well, where he's got his home base, his hideaway. That wasn't shown it wasn't shown brightly or anything. And even when he's in his house, it's very, like I say, it's very tight on him and everything. So you don't actually see the expanse of the grounds or anything, and the greenness or any bright light or anything like that. It's all very toned down. It's all almost like that's what his mind's like. It's very grey in his mind. Like you say, there's nothing there that he's trying to sort of block out any sort of distraction, because like having a pleasure or anything like that would be a distraction to what he's trying to achieve. So
because he might start to develop like real human feelings if he allowed all these other thoughts to come in. And clearly he's somebody who, even down to that little beautiful detail of bringing his heart rate down, he wants to be in complete control at all times, and therefore he doesn't have room for anything nice and pretty looking, basically.
What do you think of Tilda Swinton and her 10-minute stint in the film?
I loved how her nickname, or like the taxi driver said she looked like a Q-tip.
Yeah.
I love Tilda Swinton. She came in, she was slightly batshit. She delivered a fantastic joke about a bear sexually assaulting a hunter in the woods. And then off she fucked. I thought she was great. That scene in itself is super intense because, again, you're like, where the hell is this going? Because you know that both of these people could quite easily take each other out. So it's not a case of he's got the upper... Again, it's like he doesn't have the upper hand in that fight, and he doesn't have the upper hand in this scene with her, but in a very, very different way, because she's super articulate and, she's poised beautifully in a nice, like, crisp suit, sitting at this restaurant, enjoying her whiskey tasting, knocking them back as if it's, juice. But I really like the fact that they were game for each other, And again, so we'd met a wee match there, as I say, in a slightly different way. But I thought she was super impactful because she wasn't begging for her life. She wasn't pleading. She was just like, this is the game we're in. And you kind of take the good stuff with the bad. And she was very, very aware that her time on screen was perhaps coming to an end, but she was not. She was equally methodical about it.
Yeah, it was kind of a masterclass between two very good actors. It's the kind of thing that you would show to a bunch of students and say, this is how you do a scene between two people. This is how you create tension without raising voices or even aggressive postures or anything. It was done very, very well. And it was really, really tense because, like you say, you knew that they both were very, very good at their jobs. There was very little in between them. And it's in that world that they have created, it's the smallest of errors that can be your undoing. In his part, it was a shot that did not meet its mark, which led up to everything. And in hers, it was the fact that he was able to find her in the first place.
Yeah.
So that was the sort of the error. She didn't prepare enough or didn't think enough forward in the way that he did in terms of protecting herself and making sure that she was safe. So, yeah. So for our non-American listener, what is a Q-tip?
A cotton bud or a cotton swab.
Cotton bud, yes, correct. It's just because obviously Q-tip is an American.
Yeah, I mean, I get that. It did make me chuckle. But also what I really liked, as you say, he found her, but you know, when he walked into that restaurant, she wasn't like, oh my God, how did you get here? It was just like, have a seat. Would you like a drink? Yep. I'll get somebody over. It was just, she is perfect in this for the small amount of time that she does have.
I've always impressed with Tilda Swinton, no matter what she's in. She's one of these actors that you can just, you know that even if the film's rubbish, she's going to be good. Always going to be good. She never really picks like bad projects to do. She's always good at what she does.
And she's about to be in Pedro Almodovar's first English language film with Julianne Moore, so that's something to get very excited about.
She was in his short, wasn't she?
Mm-hmm. This is obviously a feature length, yeah.
Yeah, I was about 2-3 years ago, I think, which was really good. She was very good in that. I really enjoyed that. So what did you think of The Smiths?
Fucking hell. I actually remember saying this in my review at the time. If I listened to The Smiths that often, I'd probably want to kill people for a living as well. I fucking hate his voice.
Yep,
like
41 minutes. 41 minutes of Smiths tunes. I don't think they played all of them. Just for a bit of context, the character of the killer, who is unnamed, I must say, obviously we've just been calling him the killer. He's not named, and the other hitmen in it, the other assassins are not named. It's they're just
the client and the brute.
Yeah. And I can't remember what she's called. She does actually have a name.
The Expert.
The Expert, that's right, yes. Yeah. So part of his process for keeping himself centered is listening on a loop to a work playlist, which is formed exclusively of tunes by the Smiths. To be fair, it's not just like the early stuff. It's through their whole range of their whole discography. You know, there's bits and pieces. Yeah. Now, I think that more than anything else would be a polarizing aspect of the film for some people.
Really hate that music. But actually, because I think you get like 30 seconds of like Portishead Glory Box when he walks back home, and I'm like, thank fuck, some music that I actually like. However, again, I almost think it fits in with the character because it's not like thumping techno or anything like that. It's going to get him hyped up for a kill. It's just this sort of droning voice. Sorry if you are a Smiths fan, but it very much makes sense to his character why that's the music he would listen to.
Yeah, I thought it was quite funny, actually. I thought it was quite entertaining. He's listening to things like Girlfriend in a Coma and stuff like that. Some of it actually fitted in quite nicely with what was actually going on at the time. So in that respect, it did work in a loose sort of sense. But yes, I could understand why some people were kind of put off by it, because usually you would expect him to have maybe a mixed playlist. Maybe maybe some meditation, maybe a few wee sort of cowbells in there, and whale noises to bring his heart
Some
rate down and stuff.
ASMR to get you into
Yeah.
the mindset of killing someone. I will point out that one of the songs they use is called Hand in Glove, and obviously all I remember about discussing this film with you guys the first time was telling you that Michael Fassbender caused a worldwide shortage of fisting gloves because he kept tearing them on the set of this film.
Yep.
So that is a true fact, dear listener. There was a worldwide shortage. You may not have noticed it, but there definitely was one.
So we get to the final thorny question. Recommend it?
Oh, yes. I really like this film. And as I say, I know that Simi says this does nothing for him, but I love this film. And I get that for some people, it probably feels a bit sort of revenge by numbers, but that's also kind of the point because that's the type of character he is. I really like this. I think it's definitely worth seeking out.
Yeah, I would agree with you. It's one that you need to go into with a bit of an open mind in terms of what you're actually going to experience. There is no immediate hit with this film, which goes against sort of the convention of modern cinema, in that they'll give you something big at the start of a film to draw you into it. This pulls you in quite slowly because you get invested in the character, because they're basically not doing very much. They're sitting about looking out of a window for 15, 20 minutes mainly, and having this very quiet routine. So yes, I would definitely recommend this film. I thought it was excellent, and I would like to see other films. It'd be interesting to see if it's something that they can develop, obviously, because there's an awful lot of source material there.
I was going to say, yeah, there's loads to go off.
But whether they would go back to that particular well or not, I'm not sure. For a complete change of pace, one of the next films Michael Fassbender is doing is the feature-length remake of Kung Fury, which I don't know if you remember seeing that.
No, I knew he was in the Kneecap film. I thought that's what you were going to mention. I didn't realise he'd done something else.
No. I'm surprised you've not heard of Kung Fury. It's a martial arts comedy film. It's David Sandberg, who I believe is related to Adam Sandberg in some way.
Okay.
And it's basically about a cop who has a problem on the force and his partner gets killed and he quits. But it's set in this sort of futuristic time. So he gets assigned a new partner who is actually a dinosaur called Triceratops. They go on a mission together, which is basically there's an arcade machine robot they have to defeat, and then they get involved in a plot where Adolf Hitler is involved, or as he's called in this film, Kung Führer, so it's totally mental. So it'll be interesting to see what part he's going to play. If he's playing a Triceratops, I will be very, very impressed.
I won't lie, that sounds like the type of film that you'd find in one of those £2 bins in Asda.
It's meant to, yeah.
That sounds absolutely batshit, and I'm only going to assume you think I've heard of it because they have to fight Adolf Hitler.
It was a reasonably big deal around about 2015. I think it's on YouTube. You can see, and it's like 20 minutes long, and it is ridiculous. It looks like one of these very low budget 80s films, and the graphics and all that sort of stuff match it, and the dialogue matches it and everything as well. But it's very funny. So it'll be interesting to see what the actual real film is. And he's in it.
Gosh, Q-Your-Eyes, that's insane.
I don't know what it's going to be like, but it'll be entertaining more than anything else. So it'll be quite good.
But again, he does make like I say, he's in the Kneecap film, which is currently in cinemas. I think he's playing one of their dads or something like that. But he does make these kind of interesting choices where you're never quite sure what he's going to commit to next. Like he's done like the Assassin's Creed film. He did the remake of Macbeth. He did that film, was it Frank, where he's got the big head on the whole time. And then you'll go and do stuff like The Killer and obviously now Kung Fury. And it's just like, it actually must be very satisfying for him as an actor though, because nothing that he does is, he's not typecast in any way. He really obviously takes care picking out his projects.
Yeah, I think a lot of it's the reaction to the fact that he was in quite a few of the X-Men films. So he was wanting to make sure he wasn't just going to be remembered for that. And yeah, you're right. He does an awful lot of films with like first-time directors and very low-budget films and all that, and just works for scale and everything. So yeah, it's interesting. Obviously, he can afford to do that because he has made money doing these bigger budget films. But yes, it's a very interesting career he's having. So yeah, more power to him for it. Yeah.
Yeah. Very Robert Pattinson-esque. I know we've talked about him before. He's like dipping his toe in the blockbuster pond and then scaling right back to do things that he really wants to do. So definitely kind of similar trajectory, I guess.
Yeah. It's good. I like that with any actor if they can sort of mix it up in that way. It's always good fun. Okay, so is there anything else you think I've missed?
No, I think that's very
cool.
Better discussion.
All right, so that's us for today. We have discussed various hitmen movies and dodgy European accents, etc., etc. If you have any thoughts, have you seen the films? If you think we are talking mince, as obviously Simi will think when he listens back to this podcast, but if he wants to have an opinion, he should come on and do it with us.
That's exactly it. I'm willing to spar with him.
Yes. So if you'd like to get in touch with us, you can get us on the usual social media channels at Moviescramble. And if you want to send us an email, it's podcast@moviescramble.co.uk. And I think that's us for today. So it only is left for me to say cheerio, and we'll see you later. Bye-bye.
Bye.